Welcome everybody to an overview of what the EU exit deal has provided for us. Some challenges, many challenges to business, and we felt it was a good idea to provide a very succinct overview of that deal for people so that you can start to think about what it is. So we're hosted today with SEMLEP, for those of you who don't know us, the South East Midlands Local Enterprise Partnership, in conjunction with our cluster of LEPs, which is OXLEP, New Anglia LEP, Bucks LEP, and Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority. So it covers what we would call the Cambridge to Oxford ARC local enterprise partnerships, and in collaboration with Grant Thornton today. We've been working with Grant Thornton for a while now with regards to EU exit, and I'm always impressed with the clarity at which they can explain a very complicated business topic in very understandable business speak, and I'm very much looking forward to that today. Just before I introduce the guest speakers, just a couple of housekeeping events. Can we make sure we keep your voices on mute unless you're speaking, and that would be the speakers. We are very happy, and the speakers are very happy to take questions and at the end of the session. If you want to put them into the group chat whilst we're speaking, we will make sure that everyone is aware of what the questions are. If we don't get through to answering all of them today, we will get back to you with answers to those questions, but we will be taking questions and answers at the end. So if you could leave them to the end, that would be great. So with us today, we have got Tom Rathborne, who is the Political and Economic Affairs Lead for Grant Thornton in the UK. We've got Oliver Bridge, who is the lead for operational improvement for Grant Thornton in the UK, and Kevin Wilson in operation consulting, and his specialism is supply chain for Grant Thornton. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Tom, who will start off with the presentation today, and I am so much looking forward to everybody listening to this.
Thanks, Ruth, and hi everyone. So just again, I suppose, good afternoon, and thanks, Ruth, for having us. As you said, these are the people today. So my name's Tom Rathborne. I lead our political and economic affairs work. So essentially all things Brexit for the last 4.5 years. So aside from advising our clients on this, I also held the pen on GT UK's preparation. And I'm joined by Ollie and Kev, who I think have been on this long journey with me. So we thought we'd start today with just a summary of what's been agreed, sort of what has, what hasn't, and some things to look out for. And then we'll try and take a deeper dive into some of the key areas. Sorry, my doorbell's just gone in typical working remotely fashion. Key areas of imports and exports, suppliers and supply chain, finance, regulation, legal and data, and people, with obviously some space for a Q&A at the end. As you can all appreciate, this is a massive topic, and we're going to try the impossible and try and cover this all in under an hour. We're aiming to have about 10 minutes of questions, but as Ruth said, if we don't get that, we will come back in follow on. And obviously, this is really the start of a body of work, I believe, from SEMLEP in looking to help organisations through Brexit. So do look out for lots of other great initiatives and activity in the coming weeks and months. So the deal. Well, 4.5 years of debate, discussion, deliberation, countless dinner table arguments, 2 general elections, 3 prime ministers, 4 separate deadlines. We finally got a Brexit deal with minutes to spare. So as you can see, that's Boris Johnson there celebrating the announcement of the deal. That's right, on Christmas Eve, when it was all sort of finalised and done. On the right-hand side, you have in black and white the Brexit deal. That's 1,246 pages of our new relationship with the EU, an incredibly boring document to look at and frankly to read, but that is where Brexit ended up. Obviously, a deal was evidently great news and an impressive negotiating feat, given the impact of coronavirus, etc., and all of the other things that were going on in the world. But it is really important to note what this deal means for business. I think the easiest and most visually stimulating way of covering that is just with this quick graph. The UK has negotiated a free trade agreement which sticks us out in that blocked out area, the trade and cooperation agreement as it is called. And obviously that takes us from the full membership on the left and represents a much more detached relationship on the right. we are outside of the customs union, we are outside of the single market, there is an end of free movement of labor, lots and lots of changes. So, while a deal, in essence, it is a free trade agreement, this is the first free trade agreement in history to put up barriers. So, it does not represent complete free trade, and we're going to touch on some of that in detail, but hopefully this table just gives you a quick overview of just how significant a change this deal represents. So what's actually in this deal? Well, zero tariffs or zero quotas, I think that was really the headline that came out. Obviously, those only apply if you can qualify for them, and we'll talk about the importance of rules of origin in due course. There are level playing field commitments in this deal, so agreements between the UK and the EU that they won't be undercutting things like workers' rights or environmental standard. We've seen continued air, road, rail and maritime connectivity, some of which we'll touch on later. Some European funding programs, etc., the UK will continue to take part in. So, for example, Horizon Europe. This deal creates, similar access for public procurement as we had with membership, just better than if we were a pure third country. It also provides for visa-free travel, so any 90 days and any 180-day period, so tourist travel, etc., all completely, relatively unaffected by it. And quite importantly, these new UK EU governance frameworks. So what do we mean here? Well, just the mechanisms of how all of these new rules are measured and enforced and updated. So lots more, I suppose, red tape in simple words. In terms of what's not in this deal, I think, just keep reiterating this point that, it's not frictionless trade. That's not, to coin a phrase from a past prime minister, that's not what we get from this. There are also some quite striking omissions, I think, for many of the businesses on this call today. So the main one from my point of view was there was no transition period, no meaningful time for businesses to adjust to all of this new information. There was no agreement on conformity assessment, so businesses are going to face additional technical barriers to trade. There's no permanent data agreement. We've got a rolling at the moment 4-month sort of temporary adequacy decision while they work out the longer term position. No passporting for financial services. Obviously, no free movement of people, but also similarly, no universal carve-outs on a wider scale than what was agreed. No automatic recognition of professional qualifications. And again, really, really importantly, not a lot of detail. Lots of the things that are in this trade agreement require the establishment of those, committees and working groups to tell us what all of the information that businesses need will be. So lots of the decisions are yet to be made, and lots of the detail yet to be presented. So, quite striking that the amount of, I suppose, gaps that we still have with this new relationship. And in short, what does it mean for business? Well, I think there's sort of 4 key messages here. One, the short-term boost. That really is pure and simple that a deal was better than no deal. It may have come very late in the day, but it's definitely a much better outcome than the alternative that was on the table. Secondly, I think it will be clear from every single section that we deep dive into today that there's going to be more red tape. In a lot of circumstances, you can do what you were doing before, but it's going to be harder and more expensive. There's going to be continued uncertainty for business, both in the short term in terms of what are these actual rules and how do they apply, but in the longer term as to how does the UK decide to use its newly found sovereignty. I think for many of us, we'd sort of hope that a Brexit deal would draw a line under Brexit, but it evidently hasn't. We now have to wait and see whether this is a relationship that the UK decides it wants to build on, moving back towards Europe, similar to Switzerland, perhaps, with multiple bilateral treaties that give greater access, or whether it's something that the UK decides it wants to move away from Europe on. So is this deal really a block that we chip away at? And as we start to diverge, more barriers come in. We just don't know at this point in time. And it's clear that, the EU with things like financial services regulation are waiting to see what direction the UK decides it goes in before finalizing decisions. And then finally, we'll do our best to summarize some of the key changes today, but it's vitally important that businesses look into the detail. It's incredible the difference between sectors, between different business models, the regulatory bodies, etc. You really do have to dig into the weeds on this now and find out how exactly it will impact you and what needs to change in relation to it. And then finally, obviously we'll share the slides afterwards, but this is just to sort of ping up that there's a lot of things going on in 2021 in the UK. Obviously, at the moment, we're still in a national lockdown, which I think for many organisations is the be all and end all right now. Frankly, they'll come on to Brexit when they get a moment, but there's no fixed end date for that, so we're all still waiting to see how long that goes on. There's critical decisions that are yet to be made in the UK. So obviously, we're expecting budget on the 3rd of March. That's potentially the first post-Brexit, post-initial COVID response, post-election proper budget. So, in theory, all the makings of a bumper edition. We've got domestic legislation changes, so whether that's IR35, we've got elements of the Brexit deal that had grace periods, whether that's reach, whether that's temporary data, whether it's border processes. There are different deadlines throughout this year when new measures come into force. And then also something that interests me massively, but is not for this call, I don't think, but the elections and the politics of what's going on. So, London Assembly, Welsh Parliament, Metro mayors, and then obviously Scottish Parliament, and the rise of the SNP and potentially Indy too. Not for today, as I say, but just to capture that there's a lot going on. We'll share these slides, but important to understand when key dates are coming in for your business and make sure that you're responding accurately to those. So that was a very, very quick 10-minute run through of the deal, what was in it, what to look forward to through 2021. As I said, happy to answer questions on any of that at the end. But now we'll go and dive in a little bit deeper with some key issues. So we're going to start off with Ollie, who's going to take us through importing and exporting.
Thanks, Tom. If you can move on one more. That's great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to reiterate a little bit about what Tom said, because one of the key things to start this with is it's a free trade deal, but it's not a free trade deal. It's a trade deal where you qualify for free trade. And I think that's one of the key things to take away from today. And I'll talk about how you qualify in a minute. The key things for the impact of the agreement from an exports perspective are, apart from the free movement, no longer benefit from free movement of goods, there's customs formalities you might have seen in the news. There's VAT and tariffs that are now applicable. Again, you might have seen that in the news too. And also some certification is coming your way for most industries. Some of the things that you take as benefits are there is zero tariffs where you do qualify, so that is a positive. You can also use accumulation across EU and UK goods, and I'll cover that a bit more in a minute. And the Trusted Trader Scheme, the AEO scheme, is also applicable in terms of helping improve the movement of goods for you. So, Tom, can you move into the next slide? So the key thing for importing and exporting is the 3 elements of customs. The bits that you really need to know, which is 1, what's the origin of your goods? The second one is what's the value of your goods? And then the third one is what's the classification of your goods from a tariff perspective? So we're going to talk in a minute about origin, because that's where it really starts. And then origin is also impacted by value and classification as well. But regardless, you'll still need to know all 3 of these things if you want to move goods across borders. Thanks, Tom. So how is origin determined? The key thing here is it's not just about where it's come from. It's about the economic nationality of the good. So that means where it may have changed or where it may have established a new form of some sort. So typically, you'll see the list at the bottom. So for example, a tomato grown in the UK is a UK good. A tomato grown outside the UK, maybe in Israel or North Africa or somewhere like that, is and shipped to the UK is not a UK good. It has to be wholly grown or produced in the country. Or you maybe have a production process of some sort that needs to be significant enough to qualify. And there are guidelines in the agreement about what does and doesn't qualify. Or it may change a tariff classification, what's called a CTH or a CTSH. CTH is a change in the first 4 digits of your tariff classification, and a CTSH is a change in the first 6 digits of your classification. Or it will have to change, it will have to meet the qualification for non-originating material. So we'll cover those last 2 in a little bit more detail. The key thing here is in the agreement, you can find for each of the headings, what is the classification, or what is the thing that you need to satisfy to qualify for free trade. So have a look. There are lots of government support you can also use for classification too. So have a look at the gov.uk website, talk to the SENLEP guys, and they can help you with some of these things. But let's just talk a little bit more about the 2 key areas, which is tariff classification and non-originating material. Tom, thank you. So firstly, let's talk about classification changes. Here we have a lovely bone china cup made in Stoke. However, the bits that go into this are 1, China clay. It's got a tariff heading of 2507. It's got some natural pigments from Sri Lanka with a tariff heading of 2530. It comes in a lovely box from Egypt, tariff heading 4202. And it's got a matching spoon from France with a tariff heading of 6911. So that's your makeup of all your parts. Now, the final good, that the picture you can see there, has a tariff heading of 6911. So if you work your way through those goods, they all change headings apart from the matching spoon. But that's okay, because the matching spoon actually comes from France. So you can say, because of the EU accumulation, that has changed your tariff heading. So that would then be a UK origin good. These do vary. Please, you do need to check for individual products to make sure it's not the 6 digit or the 4 digit, etc. It's 2. So, but this is an example of what you can find. Tom, do you want to move to the next one? So this one is about the value of the goods. So this is a non-originating value of the goods. So we've got an umbrella. It's a tariff heading 6601. It's got an ex-works price of £10, of which we've got UK labour, £1.50. UK overheads and profit, £3.15. The materials, so we've got 55p handle from Belgium. We've got a £3.10 frame from China, and we've got a £1.70 cover and bag from Bangladesh. Right, if you added up China, Bangladesh and Belgium, you'd be over the 50%. However, due to the EU accumulation, the Belgian piece then counts as UK or equivalent material, and therefore the non-EU UK material is £4.80, and therefore we then qualify for free trade movement into Europe. So that's just a couple of examples of how it works. Again, they all vary. It's really you've got to go into the detail of each one to make sure you get it right. Tom, thank you very much. Right. However, some early pitfalls, some of the things that we've come across with some of our clients that you also need to be aware of. So let's start with the first one. If you've got goods that move from the EU to the UK and then back to the EU again, with no UK processing, the agreement doesn't like that, as they say, and you then would have to pay a tariff to ship it back to the EU. Kevin will cover a good example of this in a minute with some nice sweets. However, be careful that if you're moving product between the EU into the UK and then back to the EU, and the Republic of Ireland is the obvious one that's caught a few of our clients out. Be careful with that one. The other one is the non-EU to UK to EU. Again, go back to your origin. You want to make sure that you are recognizing the origin. It might not be the UK, it's just because it travels through the UK. The third one is a diagonal accumulation. So that, as we understand at the moment, there is no diagonal accumulation in the agreement. That means that, for example, if a product was produced in Japan and there is free trade from Japan into the UK, and then it's shipped from the UK to Europe, you've got to pay the tariff because it's a Japanese product going into the EU via the UK. You can't, just because they've all got free trade agreements doesn't mean that you can move it free of duty. The fourth one is about insufficient production. So you want to make sure that you do meet the minimum criteria for processing your goods to some degree. And the last one is making sure you're applying the rules of origin correctly. Tom. So some of the things you can do to help you, I'm afraid to say, and we've been asked this a number of times, how can I bypass, get round, ignore the rules? You cannot ignore the rules if you're moving in and out of the UK, I'm afraid. There is now friction in moving goods, but there are some things you can help to do to ease this. So the first one, community transit. You can move product through the UK using a community transit process. The next one is inward processing relief. So this is where you can move product into the UK, enact some sort of process, effectively not land it, and then move it back again. Customs warehousing, which in effect is you moving the product into the UK, you then effectively don't land the product, and then you can move it back out again. However, if it comes into the UK and as a landed product, i.e. it comes out of the warehouse into the UK free circulation, you would then need to pay some tariff on it at some point, or unless it's free trade, of course. AEO accreditation helps you because it makes some of the processes simpler. And last but not least, there are government grants available. There is money available to help you with some of these things. Not all of these things will be applicable because some of the smaller businesses, it probably won't be cost effective. But you know, as you've got more cost impact of Brexit, then you will then more of these will apply. Tom. So in summary, imports and exports. Before I hand over to Kevin, check your rules of origin and tariffs for your products. Check the agreement. Have a look at it. Make sure your paperwork is in order. There are people to help you with this. Freight forwarders are probably the first people I would personally speak to if I was looking to move goods. They are the people that should be able to advise you on the complexities of the individual bits of paperwork. The 7LEP guys, the LEPs can help you too. So there is help out there for it. Next one, check your VAT registrations. If you're moving product into Europe, you need to be thinking about the registration of those in those countries. However, we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Utilise government support. The gov.uk website has lots of information on there, and also explore mitigation options too. So there are things that can help you as we just mentioned. So I'm going to finish there. I'm going to hand over to Kev to talk about suppliers and supply chain.
And a very good afternoon. So the implications with suppliers and the supply chain, what will generally happen is that the cost of the supply chain will increase. With the UK, it has done some free trade deals outside. You will find that the UK deals have sort of simplified some of those tariff rates and they've rounded down. So some imports will be a little bit cheaper, but not significantly so. But overall, with the cost of declarations, the cost of potential tariffs, if applicable, the cost of transit and administration, it's going to be going up. Not only that, there is a likelihood, and you know, if you are bringing in goods, there is additional stock to protect against those service and supplies. Think of the port delays, custom checks, preparations in advance. There is also a potential risk of additional charges. These might be from your hauliers for delays at customs because the paperwork wasn't correct. Demurrage charges, those are the charges that the port actually charges you because a good is held in abeyance waiting to be moved on. And of course, there is expedited paperwork or goods. So those are the costs. Yes, please, Tom. And it's not just cost, it's also the degree of complexity. We've spoken about the declarations. There will be certifications and rules for each of these goods classifications. You also will need to keep records of these. Also, when we're talking about the supply chain, it may have been just simple as you had a UK warehouse, you transported it over to France. Now, do you have a warehouse over in France? Do you have multiple import locations? Then considering the alternate strategies, adding additional complexity, such as customs warehouses, where you'll have to bond the goods, you'll keep them separate. Transit procedures, so this is where you would move through the UK with barely touching it into another EU country. And by that, I'm sort of talking, say, from France through the UK into Ireland. And that's the island of Ireland. Think packaging as well. There are going to be other labelling and regulatory certifications and markings. So that might mean that you have to have different product codes for UK and export, with different marking, different labelling, different printing potential. Next slide, please, Tom. So we did a piece of work with a tool supplier. They were power tools. They were bringing in goods from the Far East, as a lot of companies do. And they had a smaller EU-based warehouse over in the Netherlands. What they are now doing is they are bringing those goods direct into the Netherlands. That means that it will not touch the UK and then cross another border into the EU. That stops them from having to pay double tariffs, because you will pay for a Chinese good because it's Chinese in origin, comes into the UK, you'll pay the Chinese tariff there. You will then send it without processing it very much. It's still in the same box, ship it out to the EU. That's still a Chinese good, so you'll pay the Chinese import into Europe as well. So by redirecting the goods so that they only cross effectively one of the borders, helps in that tariff. They've also reduced their range for the EU so they can bulk up their shipments. The number of shipments that you do decreases the amount of customs paperwork, because that's based on a shipment by shipment basis. The tariff is based on the good. And they've also taken steps to change their UK warehouse to a customs warehouse in the future. It is quite a protracted thing. They do have to go through quite a few hoops in order to get that, but that's what they're looking at. And the next one, please, Tom. So, a delightful suite. There we go. High street retailer bringing in goods from Europe to supply into Ireland through the UK, and it landed in a UK warehouse. Seen in the news, they struggled with these Percy Pig sweets. This was the interpretation. It's a free trade agreement, isn't it? Well, from Europe into the UK, absolutely. But then those goods through the agreement lost its preferential status. So when they moved them back into Ireland, they were subject to tariff. The mitigation approaches that could be adopted here would have been, could they have done a free transit through the UK? So that container that was coming through from Germany straight through the UK, almost stopping, do not pass and go, do not collect £200 into Ireland, and using that free transit agreement without unloading, that could have got there with free trade. Or direct to Ireland supply. Of course, that is another option, but I have to say those routes are really quite limited. Yes, please, Tom. So one of the things that you really need to be very careful of, and this is a table taken from the International Chamber of Commerce, just to sort of show what your Incoterms are, your international commercial terms. You've got two extremes on this. On the extreme left, Ex Works, and on the extreme right, DDP. On the extreme left, Ex Works means that you as the seller are only really responsible for putting it into a box and leaving it at the edge of your warehouse. Everything else is the buyer's concern. So they pay for the export documentation from, say UK to Europe, and they would also pay the import documentation and tariffs coming into Europe. On the other hand, if we take DDP from the UK into Europe, the seller, so you as a company in the UK, you would be responsible for almost absolutely everything apart from putting it into their warehouse. So all those costs, all those risks are effectively yours. So do bear in mind what your Incoterms are with your customers, with your suppliers, and make sure you understand whose responsibility and what that means. So practical steps, understand the requirements to, and I do apologize, we might be going over the same sort of ground again. You'll see some of these terms coming up and again, but they are important. Understand the categorization of goods, those trade headings, those customs headings, those 10-digit codes, the valuation of the goods and what that means for the origin. And of course, what rules then apply. Go and look them up. Look at the government websites. Familiarize yourself with those Incoterms to see whose risks, whose responsibilities, and who pays for what. The customs declarations themselves, get familiar with those. What needs to be put into these forms? Safety and security forms, export licenses, and potentially certifications as well. Things to do on top of that, provide training and procedures to your people to make the process easy, and if and when possible, systemize it to make it repeatable without error, because errors can be costly. You'll see some of the grace periods that we mentioned at the beginning. Those are grace periods. Those don't absolve you from any mistakes. So if you go back and get audited and you have made a mistake, you would still be responsible. Quantify the costs based upon the cost of administration, potential tariffs, the additional stock. Understand that impact to then base your decisions upon what you're going to do about it. Think about the mitigation strategies. The mitigation strategies, whether you're going to use sort of free transit through, are you going to be putting in a customs warehouse? Can you use processing relief? Think about sourcing. Now with all those additional costs, does local sourcing make sense to you, either as a primary or a secondary supplier? And we're talking about sort of, is that UK supply or is it European supply? Or indeed your supply strategy to your customers. Does that change? Should you be increasing prices, and rather than shipping to every single potential customer in France being as a business to customer sale, so these are individual sales, do you send larger bulk shipments to a distributor that then takes care of that sale for you? Thank you.
Kev. So I think that brings us nicely on to finance as another bucket. So just focus, obviously there's lots of different finance elements. We've tried to focus down on sort of 3 key areas. So obviously changes to VAT, which I think, Kevin and Ollie have both touched on. So EU suppliers moving goods into the UK may need to register for VAT in the UK. You may have seen a number of news stories recently of businesses in the EU realizing this and then refusing to sell to the UK. And then conversely, if you are the UK supplier importing goods into the EU post-Brexit, you will need to register for VAT in the member state of importation, navigating any requirements to appoint a local fiscal representative. So some significant changes on VAT that I'll just run through a quick example of in a second. There are also some corporate tax changes. So the end of the parent subsidiary directive. So, it includes changes to withholding taxes, so dividends, royalties, interest payments, from the EU into the UK, changes to group structures and transfer pricing elements. And then, as Kevin has said in quite some detail, cost increases and margin erosion, these sorts of things, how do they impact on your business? Do you need to reduce prices or pass on and absorb these additional costs? Lots of sort of financial elements to consider there. So just in terms of VAT at a very high level, using Kevin's example of, you know, a good that's delivered duty paid. So in this scenario, obviously, the business is, you are responsible for moving that good into Europe. You will be the importer from a European perspective. So, you know, as a member of the EU, sort of the old way of doing things, you know, you would have been able to move that good through free circulation. VAT would have been picked up in the UK. That has now changed. In the new model, you can see here, we've tried to pick out some of the new costs and requirement. You now obviously pay VAT in the country of sale. So, you know, DDP, delivering it that way, is considered a domestic supply and will therefore require local VAT registrations in the territory where the supplies are made. So, for example, in this case, you move the goods from the UK into Europe, zero rated from VAT from a HMRC perspective, and then you import, pay the VAT in France. But to do that, you need your EU EORI number to move the goods in. You then need your French registration, VAT registration, to pay that. And then with that VAT registration may come reporting requirements. So that might be the need for a fiscal representative. So, you know, the amount of paperwork and the regulations around, you know, VAT are significant, changing, but it's back to Kevin's point around your Incoterms. So who is responsible for that? If, you know, if you are selling at X Works, and then this is your customers issue, they're the ones who have to do all of this. If, however, you are, as we say here, selling DDP, so typically B2C sales, then you'll need to be thinking about VAT registrations in each member state that you make sales. This is one of the interesting bits of the Brexit deal, in that in 6 months' time, on the 1st of July, Europe is introducing the one-stop shop. That will remove the requirement to have a VAT registration in each individual member state for B2C sales. And we're doing a webinar on that later on with Semlet. I think it's in March or February. But as you can see, just simply flicking between these two slides, the level of complexity is just brought up really clearly, I think, with these two. So in terms of practical steps and what you can do on that, obviously review your Incoterms, understand, as Kevin said, you know, who's responsible, what are the charges. If you are responsible, then thinking about what those VAT changes mean for you, what do you need to do, what steps do you need to take, and then using any of that information to input into your financial modelling. Think about, you know, your cost base and your pricing structure. Do those still work with the new framework? Communicate clearly with your customers, you know, whether it's and other key stakeholders. It might be customers, it might be suppliers, it might be financiers, you know, to keep them abreast of what's going on. We often hear it from colleagues in, you know, financial services and banks that, you know, the conversation that comes at the 11th hour isn't the one that they want to have. So the earlier you can give sight of any problems, etc., the better. And if you are impacted by any of those sort of broader corporate tax changes, then do obviously make sure that you're taking into account the new rules on that. Just, you know, conscious of time, moving on to sort of regulation, legal and data. Again, I mean, I think it says it there, lots of changes, you know, whether it's around sanitary and phytosanitary standards. Pallets is one that we like to talk about a lot at GT with clients. So ISPM 15, so that is the International Phytosanitary Measure, essentially heat treatment of pallets. And wooden packaging, sorry, I must be clear, wooden packaging, not just pallets, to please Tom. Kevin. But what's important about that is, you know, essentially it's the little things that you don't think about that could trip you up. So essentially at the moment, we're hearing lots of reports of UK to EU travel taking place on pallets that aren't treated, but no one's looking at the moment. But what they're thinking is the second they do start looking, they reckon over a third of those pallets won't meet the relevant you know, sort of regulatory standards and can therefore be stopped. So, you know, it's little things like this that might trip you up. Ollie talked earlier about the CE mark and changes to product standards. So the UK is introducing the UK CA mark for goods within Great Britain from 2022. Sorry, so many dates going in here. If you want to sell into Europe, you'll need the CE mark, and to get that, you need to make sure that your accreditation house is recognised by the EU. So that's quite a significant change. There is no mutual recognition of standards in this deal. It was hoped for, it has not been achieved. The REACH guidance, so movement of chemicals, that guidance has changed. Another one where, you know, HSE, Health and Safety England, have got reams and reams on that. Labelling, the need for an EU address, there are specific requirements specifically around food. This data agreement, I think, is really important to mention. We are awaiting an adequacy decision. The temporary data agreement, you know, basically means no change for 4 months. It can end as soon as a decision is made. I think the UK government hopes that will be done inside a month. Our head of data thinks that's unlikely, and that an adequacy agreement is frankly not guaranteed. If you don't get an adequacy agreement, there are things you can do. Exploring standard contractual clauses is one way, but, you know, essentially, how would you trade data or move data between the UK and, you know, a non-EU country, so America, for example, and taking similar measures for your UK EU movements. Changes to cabotage for UK hauliers. So Kev touched on a bit of that earlier, but essentially, you know, there is limited cabotage for UK hauliers, so they can make a limited number of journeys in Europe, but it's not what it was. So they can't just, you know, drive into France, then go on to Germany, then go round to Holland, and then come back, making different drop-offs and pickups on the way. So potentially disruption that might not impact you directly, but will feed through, you know, your suppliers or you know, agents, etc. And then just a little bit of good news, so it's not all doom and gloom. UK drivers in the EU will not need an international driving permit. The UK driving license will be sufficient. So a good bit there, because I think there was a bit of concern around the two different variants of that driving permit, and one less barrier to overcome. So in terms of what this means, again, you know, the government website is there. It's a good starting point. You will, I have no doubt, feel the same frustration that we do when we click through the links to try and find out exactly what it means, and end up in, I ended up the other day on the German, a region of Germans professional qualification page, all in German. Was very, very confused and didn't get the answer that I needed. It can be a bit of a warren, but it is a good place to start. When you get into the detail, you know, just think about what are you doing and what rules apply to that. As Ollie has already said, you know, speak to SEMLEP, speak to trade bodies, trade associations. Typically, we found that they've been really, really good at just understanding the sector nuances and the different issues that will be applying there. As I talked a little bit about data too, and then finally, you know, just another from a legal perspective. You know, do you have any contracts that are either you know, unprofitable now and you need to change the terms on them, or just simply don't work? So for example, the obvious one that we've seen is where, you know, clients have a contract which says that they'll receive a service anywhere in the EU, and the UK leaving the EU now means that they're not covered. So you know, it's little things like that it's worth just double checking. And finally, just moving on sort of to people. So what are the people implications of the comprehensive agreement? So trade and cooperation agreement, TCA. Obviously no more free movement of people, so no longer have the automatic right to sort of work, study, travel, etc. In the EU, but UK visitors to the EU can stay for 90 days in any 180-day period. There are few slight little caveats to that. If you are going to Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, or Romania, those days do not count towards your 90 days. So they've exempt themselves from them, and you can stay for longer. Short-term business trips are permitted, and this is where it's going to catch a lot of people out. What qualifies as a business trip? And the challenge here is that the exact rules vary across every member state. So you may have seen you cannot open a tobacco in France as a UK national now. You can fly over to Paris and have a business meeting where you discuss working together, but you know, things like signing contracts, etc., may take you into areas that require visas. There is no more automatic recognition of professional qualifications, so you need to check with each state that you go to make sure that if your body of work is regulated or not, and whether you need to take any steps to do that. As one, particularly for doctors, architects, things like that. From a UK perspective, if you've got EU nationals working for you, the settled status scheme remains open until the end of June. So another sort of 5 and a bit months there for EU nationals to register. And then obviously the new UK immigration regime. So the UK will no longer give preferential access to EU nationals. There is a new system, and there are some steps you need to take if you would like to hire EU nationals going forward. Frankly, the people section's slightly strange in the sense, obviously with COVID, we've just seen a massive reduction in the amount of travel that's taking place. So it's been one that I think that the effects will take a little bit of time to feed through, but it's important to review your mobility policy. That sounds, I suppose, really what's the word for it, like an MBA speak, but essentially, what are your rules that you use when you travel overseas? So what steps do you ask your employees to take, or where are you going, and how is that impacted not just by Brexit but also by COVID? So there are obviously a number of travel bans for UK nationals at the moment, but just understanding what's allowed and what's not in this new environment. Included in that, I suppose, would be your mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Really, really important to communicate clearly with your staff, especially those EU nationals in the UK. As Ollie said, there have been challenges in the past where not everyone's aware of the new rules, etc., and really just making sure that everyone knows how these new rules impact their day-to-day jobs. Really, really important. Upskill your current workforce. So, as we said, there's lots of new technical elements, whether it's customs declarations or the like. So using government support to make sure that you've got the skills in-house. I think that the government support, the challenge on that is that the funding is due to be extended, I believe. There are different streams active, so it depends which ones you are using. But the support was generally around teaching and training on things like customs. And then if you do have, I'm not sure if anyone on this call will be in this situation, but if you do have employees working in other member states, for example, then just to make sure you understand the social security obligations, because there have been some changes there. So just before we move on to the Q&A, wanted to just quickly sort of say what are the sort of 4 things to focus on. Obviously, continuity, so being able to continue operating and serving customers, number one. I think, as I said earlier, one, that COVID has been the dominating force on that for many of our clients. Compliance, just making sure that all the paperwork is accurate and that you're not tripped up by any unforeseen sort of clerical errors, as it were. Cost, as much as mitigating it, it's understanding it. So just knowing where this cost is going to come from and understanding what your options are to respond. Some of these costs, as Kevin said, you can't get rid of them. It's how do you pass them on or absorb them? And I think, so much of what we've talked about today, even if it doesn't directly apply to you, it's helpful in terms of understanding how other businesses in your chain are being impacted and what they might be coming to you with. And then finally, I think just universally appropriate through COVID and Brexit, the need for communication and keeping a dialogue going with key stakeholders, being open and ready to discuss issues as and when they pop up in a clear and transparent manner. So that is a very, 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 very quick run through of the comprehensive trade agreement between the UK and the EU, the 5 key areas that we've spoken about, and just a few things to focus on. And now we have Q&A, and I'm going to do my best to see if I can find the questions, or Ruth, if you're able to,
First of all, I want to say thank you. You did, for all of us, I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody that's attended, actually raise a lot of important issues and challenges, but made it very clear what we needed to do. So thank you, all 3 of you, for that. There are a number of questions. Mainly on the importing, exporting, Ollie, so they're for you. So here's an example, right? I make tomato sauce in with Israeli tomatoes. I add onions and garlic from the Isle of Wight. It's produced, bottled and labelled in the UK. How important is the source country of tomatoes?
Well, the good news is the Isle of Wight counts as UK production.
So If the main ingredient then is tomatoes.
Yeah, the main ingredient is tomatoes. Right. So I think the key thing here is there a change in the tariff code heading if you're going to ship it from the UK into the EU? Because I'd imagine, and this would need to be checked, that tomatoes would have a different tariff code than tomato ketchup or bottled tomato sauce, and therefore the origin would then be the UK. So that one sounds like it should be okay, but you just need to check to make sure there's a change in tariff, and that is a suitable method of origin. Because the value, I can't imagine the value one's going to be particularly useful there, because I imagine that the value of the tomatoes is going to be a reasonable size of the source. So it sounds like it should be okay. You probably just want to check the actual example against tariff code headings though.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. The next one is the same kind of thing, but different. Desk lamp made in China, shipped to France, replugged in France, and then sent to the UK. Is that sufficient processing to make it an EU product and not attract the 2% tariff?
I'm afraid it probably isn't. So because unless your plug is incredibly expensive and from the UK to reach the value level, or that you're doing some other level of assembly, or to change the tariff code of the lamp, i.e., could you import it as parts and then it becomes a lamp in France, at which point then it probably would qualify. But I would suggest that just putting a plug in it, I'm afraid, probably doesn't.
Okay. I don't know who's just going to quickly answer this or who said this, but is a fiscal representative an accountant? It was just used big language.
Essentially.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fine. As an accountant. All right.
It doesn't have to be though, does it? It can
No,
be it's as well. It's a legal entity.
Yeah, but the fiscal, it's they do the books for you, so they take care of the tax return, etc. So yeah, I think broadly speaking, £1,500 a month, I think is a rough number that I've seen quoted.
Okay, brilliant. There's two questions around the VAT. So one is, I sell direct to consumers in the EU through my website. The prices are inclusive of UK VAT. Does this need to be handled differently now? So
the answer is yes. Because you will have different VAT rates in different countries. There are two ways of handling this that we've seen. We've been working with retailers having exactly the same problem. One is you keep your price the same, and then you vary your VAT rates that you end up paying, which varies your margin on your product. Or you sell the product and you adapt your website to be able to be adjusted to each of the countries, which obviously involves a software change. There is the one-stop shop coming up in 6 months' time, which will help you with this, because you'll be able to pay the VAT to each of the countries individually. Tom, did you want to add anything?
I think it's just say that we've also got that deep dive on
I'm going to
B2C coming up, which I think will help with that. It's what we've also seen is just a number of businesses just turn off e-commerce for Europe, because if you start triggering these VAT registrations, so we've seen businesses have products sent back because say they sent it before January, but it didn't get there until after January, and then they said, well, this doesn't, it can't come in. So we've seen a lot of challenges around sort of e-commerce, full stop, and it's I think it's one where we want to get into the detail on.
Okay, so I think that how does an EU consumer pay VAT on a low value item bought online from the UK would be covered by that as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because it also depends on, if you're doing it, it's back to your Incoterms, it's who's responsible for bringing that good into France. And if it's you, then you need to be the one clearing it, you need to be the one paying the VAT, you need to have the VAT registration, etc.
Most B2C businesses will probably want to deliver a product to their customer where the customer doesn't need to do anything, doesn't need to pay anything, doesn't need to sign anything, collect anything or anything like that. So you end up being responsible for the VAT and any paperwork as well. And there is, we'll go to this far more in the B2C workshop, but there is certain criteria levels in terms of value in particular, where once you trigger those, you'll be responsible. And you get to this sort of point where it actually isn't economically viable to do few packages into particular countries. But again, we'll cover that in a bit more detail.
Okay, and we've had an email in with regards to documentation. So what I'm going to cover off now is to say that, I mean, both Tom and Ollie have mentioned the fact that we're going to do some more deep dive webinars in connection with this. So we're going to send out some details, but on the 17th of February, we'll be doing a deep dive for business to consumer. We felt that it was important to separate it because the challenges are kind of different. And on the 9th of March, we'll be doing a business to business one. So please, when we send out the details of that, join that webinar and you can ask as many questions as you like. It will be an absolute deep dive in connection with the person that's emailed in about the problems with chief applications, documentation. We are working with the Chambers of Commerce, both Bedfordshire Chamber of Commerce, North Hants and Milton Keynes. And on our website, there are a number of half-day, full-day workshops that will help you complete all the documentation. So what I would recommend is you please look at our website for all the events, all the webinars, all the workshops. We have funding to you don't have to, these are fully funded, so you do not have to worry about paying for any of this training. We're here to help you understand all the documentation, all the Incoterms, all the, the chief application and everything. There will be something on our website that will cover what you are looking for, but please have a look. There's lots and lots of different ones. It will look saturated when you look at it, but you need to find the right one for you. So or you can contact the Chambers of Commerce in Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes or Northamptonshire, and they will tell you which ones would be the best ones for you. Have a look at our website. Justin from the Bedfordshire Chamber did put a link to his ones on here as well. So hopefully that will cover that. We just had one more question come in. Interesting. Do you think post-deal UK government will try and find an easier way to deal with VAT and tariffs, or is this it and we have to live with it?
The $1 billion, $1 trillion question. Being completely candid, I haven't got a clue. In some areas, the conversation is about divergence, which then makes anything, so if you just talk about financial service regulation in the UK wanting to go in one direction, well, that has consequences now because of things around like the level playing field, etc. So a decision to move away in one area would impact on another. If the UK decides that it wants something more like the Swiss deal, then the obvious area for negotiation would be on things like free movement of people. I can't see that happening. We really just don't know. I think it's going to take some time for us to understand what the full impact of these new measures are, and then we might see specific interventions. You've seen, fishermen and this £20+ million pot for them. Really small dollop of money, frankly, for the challenges. But I don't think we'll know in the short term. I'd look out for budget and see if there's any announcements there around easements or further support for businesses on this. But as we said, the one-stop shop introduction in July, totally separate to Brexit, but will help significantly for a lot of businesses, specifically e-commerce. And then on tariffs. If you're not qualifying for the origin, then there's not much that they can do short of rejoining the customs union and single market. What we might see is this triangulation point, or sorry, the diagonal point. So saying that maybe there's a way that Japanese products can count. So maybe there's a way of adding up EU or UK trade deals where we've both got the same sort of deal. Could those be brought together to help reduce tariff thresholds? Maybe, but this significant change on the movement of goods is here to stay, I think.
There is clauses in the FTA of the agreement which does suggest that the government and the UK government and the EU need to work together to improve various processes. So in the medium term there might be small improvements, but as Tom says, in the long term, who knows? It's
the reality of this new FTA.
But we do have the one-stop shop coming in on the VAT side, and I'm not going to put any weight behind it at all, but I think it was HMRC are looking at a new system to do customs declarations, but that's kind of been waiting in the wings for some time now, and it's still not come to fruition, so I wouldn't hold your breath.
Which is probably why most of us haven't heard of it, but about it now. One final question, which was just a very simple one. Is Switzerland the same in every aspect as the EU countries in regards to the trade deal?
No.
Okay. That's it. Simple. So there's a trade deal separate for Switzerland?
There's different arrangements. So, for example, Switzerland on people, they've far more generous in terms of your ability to work in Switzerland than the EU. So, you know, again, another, if you're doing stuff with Switzerland, check the details to find out what exactly it means for you.
Brilliant. So we're 3 o'clock, slightly one minute over. I think that's all the questions. Do you want to move to the next slide, Tom, if you've got the...
I've got the...
There we go.
Yeah.
That slide shows you the forthcoming workshop stroke webinars. There is there's 4 on there. There's a lot more that we're doing, and the 2 that I've mentioned for Grant Thornton aren't on there as well. Please check back to our website. All the details will be under the events page. So just put events and everything will come up. And on behalf of SEMLEP and the ARC Local Enterprise Partnerships, I just want to say thank you to Tom, to Ollie and to Kevin for such a wonderful, informative and thought-provoking talk today. And for any businesses that are here, please do contact the SEMLEP Business Advisor team, because we are here to answer as many questions as we can, to direct you to people that know the answers to the questions if we don't. And we are here on your side to help get through what is a really, really challenging time for the UK businesses. So thank you very much for your time.